Well, good morning. I'm going to give you a whole heck of a lot of information, and that's why I give you a handout, because in order for the mind to receive all this, you can't. So the handout, just sit back, listen. You don't have to take notes. Everything that's important is on your handout. I made an error when I made the handout. I took it to the printer. I went over it 3 or 4 times. And the second to the last page, which is the positive part that Gail said, if you don't tell them something positive, I'll shoot you, I left out. So that's why you have that one single page. And the other one is websites to go to, lifenews.com, lifesitenews.com, etc. These are the websites I go to every day. And that's when my wife starts crying because she knows she's not going to see me for an hour or two. But this is where you're going to get the information. One of the things I've been always an advocate for is to make sure that I just don't have the information, that you, the people out there, the people that do the 99% of the work, have that information. So we're living in a dumbing down of our society, and our job is to hopefully make you smarter, okay? I've been speaking about conscience. This is my 4th year in a row. And I became obsessed with the attack on conscience after my American College of OBGYN in November of 2008 said, guess what, Catholic physician, you must do abortions against your conscience, or if you don't, you have to refer. And this is the executive committee of the American College of OBGYN. The entire college is about 30 to 35,000 physicians, but the ones in control are less than 20. And this is why I say the minority is pushing us around. There's only one Barack Obama, and we'll show you how the minority is now pushing the majority around, in your face pushing us around. And it's time, 40 years too late, to stand up. As we heard some of the speakers earlier say, it is now, the line has been drawn in the sand. And we, the younger ones in this audience, may even undergo physical persecution. We have undergone verbal persecution for 40 years. I started with these 3 people because I think they kind of underline what we're up against. There's only one Lady Gaga. There's only one president of the United States by the name of Barack Hussein Obama. And there is one Secretary of Health, yes, Catherine Sebelius. And what absolutely, I lost my mind when I saw it, I was so upset, was Hillary Clinton's December 8th speech in front of the UN. But before we proceed, I'd like to start with what's the most important thing, and that's a prayer. All of humanity was created out of love. Everyone in this room was created out of love by the Creator of love. And why were we created? To love. And all of us, when face to face with our loving God, at the end, will be judged on how well we loved on this earth. Abortion is anti-love in the extreme, an offense against the author of life, God himself. Yet God's love is so great that despite 54 million plus abortions in the United States and probably 1 billion abortions on this globe, that will not diminish God's love. Even the excessive numbers that have passed us by, of all the abortions performed over time, in no way can diminish the love of God. May his infinite love and infinite grace bring those men and women involved to reconcile with themselves, their victims, and their God. On January 22nd, 39 years ago, an intrinsic moral wrong became a legal right, championed by a minority of the people involved. Amen. Sex is one of the new religions for our young people in the audience, and Peter Criff has said some powerful words, some of which I've repeated in the past. Murder is justified in our American society only when it is for sex. Think about that. The new religion is sex, or secular hedonism, and abortion is a backup for birth control, and birth control is needed to demand sex as a right without the consequences of babies. 99% of violent murders in the United States are committed legally by hypocritical physicians who had forgotten their Hippocratic oath.
Amen.
Great quotes by Peter Criff. Lady Gaga, whether she's male, female, transsexual, hermaphrodite, I have no idea, but she has used sex to promote sex in all of its form. Gay, straight, transgendered, I don't know. Her song, Born This Way, is now the theme song for the homosexual lobby, perpetrated by NGOs, which stands for, thank you very much, at the United Nations, and quoted by Hillary Clinton herself. Power. He's only one man, but he has power behind him. But I still, in my heart, believe it is the minority of people out there who want this to continue. They do not like what they see is happening in our country from a moral basis. We have forgotten God. And abortion will never be repealed until we return to God and return to the basic social unit of our society, the human family. Until we do, the abortion issue is going to be prolonged. Just a partial list of some of the things, and some of the other speakers have mentioned it. If you didn't know, banning Bibles from Walter Reed Hospital until the U.S. Catholic bishops yelled so much, literally, that they did rescind that now you can have rosaries and prayer objects and Bibles at Walter Reed from our vets returning from Iraq or Afghanistan. He tried to shut down a Protestant church, saying that you don't have any right to hire just Christian ministers. They can be non-Christian. And even the Supreme Court, and even the liberals on the Supreme Court in February voted 9-0 and said, no, you're absolutely wrong. This is a tyranny of your executive power, Mr. President. And we speak for the people when we say 9-0, you're not going to go that way. Accusing Christians of slowing down social progress by clinging to their religion. Remember that direct quote? And your guns? Refusing to allow military chaplains to read a denominational letter in the church services unless edited by the government. Refusing to defend, and I think this is impeachable, the President of the United States is to protect all federal laws. What happened to DOMA when he said to Eric Holder, you will not defend it? And in fact, I'm evolving my thinking on homosexuality, and as I evolve, I may want to do away as an executive order the Defense of Marriage Act. Refusing to allow references to God at funerals, at military funerals. Appointing an open lesbian legal scholar who teaches at Georgetown, who has said this, her name is Che Feldblum, to the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, who claims she wants to put a burden on the belief liberty of Christians. Her agenda is to promote the sexual rights, that sexual rights trump religious rights when the two rights are in conflict. Regarding your freedom to live out your biblical beliefs on sexuality, I'm having a hard time coming up with any case in which religious liberty should win. Attacks on religious belief, liberty, and conscience with the HHS mandate, and removing grant monies from the U.S. Bishops' Commission that was giving monies to help women who were victims of sexual trafficking. And because the church does not allow abortion or contraception, they've been doing this for the last 8 to 9 years, the HHS said, we will no longer fund your monies to help women who are being sexually trafficked. And remember the FOCA Act? It seems like, I can't believe everyone has forgotten the FOCA Act. How many, 4 or 5 years ago, we all wrote postcards to the White House. And what did the postcards say? Please do not pass the Freedom of Choice Act, which would repeal all state pro-life legislation that has occurred over the last 15 years. And our president bragged before in 2007 to Planned Parenthood that the first act of his presidency would be to pass FOCA. He's passed FOCA. He's just done it under the radar, so to speak. He passed FOCA when he said to Bush's protection of conscience executive order, it is no longer present. It is no longer an item. I, the president, have now rebuked the law of conscience rights for Christians. He revoked it when he is now passed in your face, and I don't care if you like it or not, the religious liberty principle of the First Amendment. Promotion of deviance, pushing a homosexual agenda as an international right at the United Nations. Explicit sex ed programs. As young as 8-year-olds, learning that there's no longer 2 genders, but 6 genders, depending on how you feel that day. If it's Tuesday, you may be male. If it's Wednesday, you may be female. On Thursday, you could be in between. To 8-year-olds. Negating gender as a biological fact, and homophobia trumping Christianophobia. And lastly, pleasure is told to our children as the main determinant whether you should engage in sexual activity. This is taught by the NEA, by the United Nations, by Canada north of us, and by the UK across the pond. A close-up of Hillary's speech, and time doesn't permit, so I'm just going to give you a tidbit. On December 8th, she said this to the United Nations: "The most challenging issue arises when people cite religious or cultural values as a reason to violate and not protect the human rights of lesbian, gay, transsexual, and bisexual citizens." And Hughes uses a metaphor. She claims by not giving them those rights with gay marriage, etc., it is equal to and not unlike the justification offered by violent practices towards women like honor killings, widow burnings, and female genital mutilation. And with that, of course, they played Lady Gaga's song in the background, and the gays and lesbians celebrated their rights at the UN. She says opinions are still evolving on homosexuality as they did with slavery, and what was once justified or sanctioned by God is now properly reviled as an unconscionable violation of human rights. In each of these cases, we have come to learn that no religious practice or tradition trumps the human rights that belong to all of us. This is our opposition. They're turning marriage on its head, the basic unit of our society. In contrast to that, John Paul II, in a beautiful encyclical called Evangelium Vitae, the Gospel of Life, said this: "He counted the Marxist strategy that has unsettled America traditional family culture for probably the last 60 years. This didn't happen overnight. The Pope believed in transforming culture so that it supports life, not death, and that women occupy a place in thought and action which is unique and decisive." And this is important, so I'm going to read it twice. Accordingly, Pope John Paul II stated that there would be no renewal of church and a world, no renewal of the world, without a renewal of marriage and the family. And there would be no renewal of men and women without the full acceptance and return to the truth of God's plan for the body and human sexuality. Sex sells everything, and this is a Vogue magazine in France showing a 10-year-old girl. She's 10, 4th or 5th grade, selling not only the object she's selling, but selling herself. 20 years older, we have Sandra Fluke. And several weeks ago, a graduate student, went to a fake congressional hearing for a fake cause that ended up causing a giant controversy for mostly fake reasons. This is not a battle of women's rights, of one party telling women that they cannot use birth control. This is a battle for religious rights. Contrast that to us who are old enough to remember Life is Worth Living, a Sunday TV program at dinner time. And Bishop Fulton Sheen was one of the best orators of what is right and true and what is our love affair with God all about. He wrote a beautiful book, 3 to Get Married, and he explored the authentic meaning of married love, which is so intimately connected with earthly happiness, so that to misunderstand its purpose and direction was to miss the meaning of life itself. He contended that any love that does not look to heaven, any love that does not look to heaven, descends into hell. How did this all start? Where did the United States go wrong, and Europe and most of the civilized countries of the world? It started a long time ago. The Democratic Socialist Party of the United States is alive and well. We have 70 of its members presently in the Congress. 70. And so, Machiavelli said a long time ago, we can know a leader by the people with whom he surrounds himself. Look at the hexagon. Democratic Socialist of America. For those who don't know what that means communist or cultural Marxist or democratic socialist. All the same. One world government. Government is the boss. Your individual rights are trumped by the government's power. Working Family Party, socialistic. The New Party, socialistic. Acorn, socialistic. SEIU, the largest union in the United States, socialistic. Who visited the White House more than any other person the first year of his presidency? Mr. Stearns from SEIU. And who are they connected to? And who does he surround himself with? Our present President of the United States. A book was written showing the effects of damaged children and what happens particularly to the male. One of the speakers said that 48% of all pregnancies end with a single mother right now. And what does a single mother do to her son, as opposed if she has a daughter? She probably is going to abuse him verbally. We have found in psychological studies that male children from single mothers do the worst. They have no discipline, they don't have the male father figure around, and so they have more trouble with truancy, school problems, slow learning, and what have you. And what does that do to our economy? Well, this author, Mitch Pearlstein, says in this book, according to his extensive research, that America's damaged children have perpetrated a seemingly endless cycle of divorce, illegitimacy, school truancy, joblessness, poverty that threatens not only the future of traditional marriage, but the safety and the safeguard of our nation as a whole, as a pillar of Western civilization. Yet he forgot to mention a few dots. He didn't connect. Last year I talked about Antonio Gramsci, an Italian communist who said, Stalin, you got it all wrong. The body count's too high. You go by the bayonets and kill people, we're going to be killed. Do it by verbal engineering. Enter the institutions of learning. Pollute minds. brainwash the youth. No body count, and you'll do a better job. So, right before Hitler came to power, some of these German communists got together and formed the Frankfurt School, and they came to America to get away from Hitler's onset. And one of them was Herbert Marcuse, who was the mentor of Betty Friedan. And for the young in the audience, you're saying, who is she? She started the radical feminist movement in the 60s by one book. And I remember what Rita Marker said, all social engineering begins with verbal engineering. No longer are we throwing stones or rocks or bayonets. Words are changing what you want to have changed. And so she wrote this book, and she lampooned the traditional stay-at-home mother, just like the broadcaster lampooned Mrs. Romney last week, saying, how can you talk about economics? You only raised 5 kids, had breast cancer, and you have multiple sclerosis. You're a loser. What did Betty say in the 60s? A woman needs a man like a fish needs a bicycle. That was her slogan. Men are the enemy, women are the oppressed. We have to massacre and sacrifice the male image. So they came to America, and just some of the things that they try to push, which is now part of the National Educational Association's agenda in schools, teaching of graphic sex and homosexuality as normal to our children as young as 6 to 8, emptying of the churches, promotion of excessive drinking and drugs, dependency on the state for state benefits, control and dumbing down of our media, encouraging the breakdown of the family, etc., etc. Abolishing differences in education of boys and girls, and declare women the oppressed class and men the oppressors. An attack, and this is the thing that we will not change abortion until we get the traditional family values back. That has to be first. Attack the notion that the traditional family is the basic unit of society, and all of this prepared the way for a warfare against the masculine gender promoted by Marcuse under the guise of, quotes, woman liberation. This man wrote the definitive book on natural law, and he said this, for all those who doubt communism, that's historical. That's in the past. That's not in our day. Marxism? Come on. Are you a conspiracy theorist? Here's what he said. One might think the above, no concern for the citizens of today in the democratic states of the early 21st century, because we presume the totalitarian state is a relic of the past. And if you think that, you are doomed in your thinking. He said, remember, Herr Hitler came to power not through violence, not through the bayonet, but by way of manipulation of the democratic processes of the Weimar Republic. I talked about this man who testified in 1963 last year. He wrote a book in 1958, about 25 years after the Frankfurt School hit our shores. And he listed 45 goals of the American Communist Takeover and Party of America. And I would say of the 45, 30 have come to fruition. And they are very similar to what the Frankfurt School has said. What's the consequences when we tell women that motherhood sucks? Motherhood is for maids. Motherhood is for the poor. Motherhood drags you down. You have to have a college education. You have to be a CEO. So women have been told the glass ceiling is where happiness, not God, resides, but the glass ceiling. You can do anything you put your mind to. And the question is, truth and consequences, what are the consequences? Success of women breaking the proverbial glass ceiling of corporate America has shattered more than glass. Women's health has been seriously compromised and declined. They get heart attacks now almost as often as men did in the 40s and 50s, climbing that corporate ladder. Decline in marriage and the exponential increase in divorce and the proportional number of married women in their early 30s is lower than any other time in history of married women in their 30s. It's the lowest ever in our history of the United States. 40% of couples now cohabitate, now accepted as the legitimate part of social mores. Reproductive technologies, IVF, surrogate motherhood, donor eggs, donor sperm, same-sex couples have virtually eliminated man from the equation of procreation. We now have on birth certificates now not a name of a male or female, but partner number 1 on the birth certificate and partner number 2. Single motherhood has lost its stigma, and many women have radically altered their notion of biological motherhood as having little or no bearing on their self-image. Motherhood? 50% of Italian women don't get married, and 50% of Italian women, either married or not married, don't want any children. All of Europe now is undergoing a demographic. We heard about China earlier this morning. Europe is not replacing its population, but the Muslim population is in all those European countries. This came out, this is the quarterly from the Cambridge, doesn't that sound very, very distinct, you see? Yes, and this lovely lady wrote this lovely book and this lovely article quarterly, and she said this, right out of Huxley's Brave New World, that since pregnancy causes natural inequality between the sexes, a woman must be liberated from the burdens and risk of pregnancy, and pregnancy now is defined as a medical problem, along with other conditions that cause pain and suffering. She went on to say that if there is a disease that causes the symptoms and risks similar to those caused by pregnancy, we call that a disease, and she lumped the disease as measles as a pretty fair comparative to the state of pregnancy. The only way in her mind that we will be equal is to have echogenesis, the new word. What is echogenesis? Artificial wombs. If you look closely, those are babies inside those machines. And therefore, if women do not have to go through 9 months away from their job or their teaching or their research or whatever, climbing Mount Everest, they can have their child in that cocoon mechanically for 9 months. Only then will the burdens and risk of pregnancy through the use of echogenesis make women equal to men. It's a thought right now. It's not reality, no. And remember in Huxley's book, for the young you may remember this, reproduction had taken over the world state, by the world state in his book, where children were created, decanted, raised in hatcheries and conditioning centers. This is theory right now, but she says until this becomes reality, women will always be on equal, comparing it to men. What's the effect on men? Oh, by the way, this is the new maiden of radical feminism. Sandra, I can't get enough birth control for now. William Bennett wrote a book that came out this year, The Book of Man, and for the first time in history, women are better educated, more ambitious, and arguably more successful than men. Now, and the women in the audience, you might say, what's wrong with that? I don't have a problem with that. But at what price? Men are more distant from their children and families than ever before. Only in a lifetime, in 1960, 11% of children lived apart from their fathers when I was growing up. 11%. That's now increased to 27%. It takes not a village, Hillary. It takes a man and a woman to give that child that you decided to conceive along with God the best chance to hold fast the traditional steadiness of the basic unit, the family. And many women, as I mentioned, are handicapped if raised by single women. What about conscience? Well, I've been talking about conscience my 4th year, and the old definition was pretty good. Conscience was that inner voice inside of us. We're born with it. And as C.S. Lewis said, it's God talking to us. It's as God having this one-on-one talk to every human being. So we know what's right and wrong, but we need objective criteria. The conscience can't do that, so it has to look outside of itself. For Christians, it's the Bible, oral tradition, or if you're a Catholic, from the magisterium of a 2,000-year-old church. You can't do it by yourself because if your conscience is uninformed, you can make terrible mistakes. That was the traditional view. Now the subjective view is you have a right to do whatever your conscience dictates to you. And how many politicians have saying that? So Justice Kennedy, that swing vote in the Supreme Court, said this in a Planned Parenthood, Casey versus Planned Parenthood in 1992. And you think this is subjective? Quotes, "At the heart of liberty is the right to define one's own concept." What? One's own concept of existence, of meaning, of the universe and mystery. The trouble with Justice Kennedy's thought is what happens if my conception is different than your conception? And we're on a collision course. Martin Sheen just was in a play in LA called 8 after Proposition 8. And he claims to be a Catholic in good standing, and he starts out pretty well in that he said, my religion's highest standard is conscience. And I'm saying, right on. And then he says this, but nothing can get between my conscience and God, not even the church. And with a conscience that is uninformed, it's no conscience at all. It's subjectivity. And lastly, for conscience, 2003, this couple decided to get married, and the Supreme Court of the state of Massachusetts said by a vote of 4-3, we're evolving our meaning of marriage, and now you can have same-sex marriage. And so law was formed, not by the majority of the people. In all 31 states where homosexual marriage has been brought up, the score is 31-0, not in favor of gay marriage. In the 6 or 7 states, either the legislature or a Supreme Court has passed this. And the tragedy is you see such joy in their face with their child. That marriage lasted 2 years. What's going to happen to us soon? This is a martyr. He doesn't look like a Christian. He is a Christian. He was the only Christian in the Pakistan parliament a year ago, and because he was against blasphemy laws, which give undue control of the Muslims over anything non-Muslim, he was assassinated. And he is indeed, he walked the talk, he gave his life. We now have Obamacare versus conscience. And where is it going to go? He's given us the church. So being benevolent, he's given the church a year to think about, do you sell your conscience and come on board, or are you going to be fined or go to jail? How strong is your faith? And then we have, it seems as a Catholic, I can say this, the only Catholics that get the press are the dumb, radical Catholics that are not in unison with their church. Dumb. Well, she said the Catholic Church has a problem with that conscience thing being that objective conscience, that is based on objective truth, which is no longer taught in any of our universities that went out in the 70s. There's no such thing as objective truth to the secular colleges, and in some of our so-called Christian colleges and Catholic colleges, that's now being taught today. Where are we with respect to Jesus? This is a play that was last fall in Paris. It was called On the Concept of the Face of Jesus. It was called a contemporary art play for all those avant-garde people in the audience. And it shows an old man on stage who is old and feeble, and his son comes to visit him, and his dad has chronic diarrhea. So he's flooding the stage with his human waste. And finally, he climbs a ladder at the end of the play behind the face of Christ. And more feces comes out of the eyes of Christ and covers the face of Christ. And then all of a sudden, the face becomes real again. And the blinking sign said in front of it, "You are my shepherd." And they added with neon lights, "You are not my shepherd." The blinking "not" was there. Christian of all faith, French kids, students said, "This is ridiculous." And they locked arms and they tried to blockade that play. And they were arrested and beaten. And if you read the newspaper accounts, it was their not being with the so-called contemporary art as it is shown. In Canada, right now in Ontario, they're trying to tell 8-year-olds, as I mentioned, that you may not be what you look like in pants. 10? Okay. And so there's a group out there, parents again, the clergy has been quiet and silent to the point that the silence is screaming aloud. So it's up to the parents to say, I don't want my 8-year-old boy to be told that on Wednesday he looks like a girl or acts like a girl, or vice versa. Don't teach me to question what sex I am, if I'm transsexual, transgendered, intersex, or maybe both. A book written by Anne said, this is Anne Hendershot, the American Psychiatric Association, we can't even trust the medical profession anymore. I'm saying that as a physician. This is no longer science or evidence-based medicine. This is political. And 10 years ago, they said that, no, pedophilia, it's not that bad. It can't be a positive thing for that child. Like the Greeks did it. They had a mentor who was older and took the young boy, and they had this love and taught him the arts and everything else. What's wrong with that? And so we have one psychologist who is a professor at an unnamed university who said that basically you can no longer use chronological age to determine the maturity if a child is ready for sex. Now, he's a professor at a university. Hard to fight that. As I said, get ready for the young in the audience. You may be like the picture on your right. This is what's happening right now. Christianity is the most persecuted religion in the world. In the world. Right now, we've just been bombarded with, you can't come to our party, we don't want to listen to you because you're pro-life. It's words. Be prepared. This is a sign in France 2 months ago on a church which says, we will burn your church. And of course, we always said sex is the religion of today, and so here's a newsflash. On Christmas Day, there was more hits on Christmas than on porn by 0.1%. If you look at the blue line, which is porn, you see that it's going up, where the flashes of Christmas or Christmas-related articles on the internet is staying, those little orange blips, the same. They predict by next year porn will be more looked at than Christmas on Christmas Day. Another book out by a Dr. McElhaney, The Negative Effects on Young Girls being encouraged to engage freely in casual sex. If pleasure is your principle to say yay or nay, what happened to the consequences? And our Pope came here in January, and he told the bishops here in the United States, beware, it's coming. Religious attacks are going to become more frequent. And so you have to warn your people. The silence of the pulpit in not only the Catholic Church, but in synagogues and in all Lutheran and Protestant religions have been definitely silent because we were afraid. We had to be politically correct. And no longer can we stand by and think of that. Otherwise, we'll have somebody on a recess appointment claims that he now is the new pope. Or he can hang a bishop on a cross and say crimes against the state. And here's another 2-minute of notoriety. A young girl, former Catholic, 16 years old, who at the age of 10 decided, I don't believe in God. She did, or her parents, or her older sister. And so there was this sign at this public high school put up in 1973, the same year as Roe versus Wade. We outlawed prayer in public school that same year. Did you remember that? And so this public high school put out this nondescript, have a good day, God's with you, whatever. And she said that sign bothered me. And so minority, the tyranny of the minority, won again. And she sued the school district. And that prayer that had been there for 40-some years has been removed. In California, they're mailing condoms to your 12-year-olds in unmarked packages. In the Supreme Court of Canada, that lovely bleached blonde in the center has quoted to say that for the first time, the state is the primary educator of your children, no longer mom or dad. Canada. We're usually about 4 or 5 years behind Canada and about 6 to 8 years behind England. And way back when, one of our best philosophers, C.K., said this: the family is the test of freedom. It is the only thing that a free man makes for himself and by himself. And did you miss it? Planned Parenthood said EC month is March. And EC, emergency contraception, now is if you fail or you don't use BC, you can use EC and you can be a superwoman, gals. The next two are doctors, and I don't know where they trained. This lady, Dr. Catherine Constable, nice name, withdrawal of artificial nutrition, so-called, and hydration for patients in a permanent vegetated state. If they're unconscious, they get no treatment. Another very pretty lady, Francesca Minerva, who got a lot of flack by saying in another medical journal that infanticide, if you say abortion is okay, then so is infanticide. Kill them before, kill them during, kill them after. And she got so much flack, she said, maybe I should retract. And this lady in UK, they've decided you can't wear crosses or crucifixes to work because it's not part of your religious thing like a burqa. So you cannot wear crosses in England to work. Denmark said by 2030, 18 years from now, we're going to eliminate all Down syndrome. We're going to board them all. And Germany said that before they started killing Jews, they killed defective children with Lebensunwürdiges Leben, a life unworthy of life. And then we have 2 billionaires who are going to Ireland, dropping millions of dollars. They've got the power, these two jerks, to tell Ireland, you've got to put abortion in your, otherwise we're going to, more money, and we're going to take away your aid from the EU. Now this is a quote worth remembering. I got about 3 minutes left. This is Cardinal Francis George in Chicago, who a month ago said this: I will probably die in my own bed. He's about in late 70s right now. My successor will probably die in prison, and his successor will probably be martyred. We talked about this young man. He walked the talk. He's blind, and he's trying to say, China, you're way off in your one-child policy. This man did a famous quote. He spent 7 years in a Nazi concentration camp. He was a Protestant minister. And his quote has gone through time. If you look on memorable quotes on the internet, you'll say, first they came for the communist, but I did not speak out because I was not a communist. And then they came for the trade unionists, and I didn't speak out because I didn't belong to a trade union. Then they came for the Jews, and I didn't speak out because I was not Jewish. And then they came for me. And there was no one to speak for me. A Catholic cardinal in a beautiful speech called the Munster, the city of Munster. He said, Christians, steel yourselves and hold fast. At this moment, we're not the hammer, but we are the anvil. We are here to shape humanity, the right and the wrong. And for that, the Nazis said, he's too famous. He'll be a martyr if we kill him. We'll behead 3 of his priests. And so we are, and that is your challenge today, to be the anvil. Remember this scene from the Passion of Christ? This is what our present culture says. It mocks virginity. It mocks modesty. It mocks chastity. It mocks motherhood. And she holds a demonic child. I'll end with this quote from a bishop in Peoria, Illinois, who spoke last Saturday to Christian men. And I think his speech is every bit as good as those wonderful people that went before him. The risen Christ is our eternal Lord. The head of the body, the church, our high priest, our teacher, our captain in a well-fought fight. We have nothing to fear, but we have a world to win for him. We have nothing to fear, for we have an eternal destiny in heaven. We have nothing to fear, though the earth may quake and kingdoms may rise and fall and demons may rage, but Saint Michael the archangel and all the host of heaven fight on our behalf. No matter what happens during this passing moment, at the end of time and history, our God is God, Jesus is Lord forever and ever. And he mentions Christus vincit, Christus regnat, Christus imperat. Christ wins, Christ reigns, Christ commands. And this is why, as we look at this election in November, we have to realize that socialism comes in all forms. And that is why 2012, in my lifetime, and I think in yours, is the most important election that we've faced to date. Thank you.